Good morning, geographers. This is Mputi Tsidiso speaking to you. We are going to work on the topic in geomorphology, which is a very challenging topic because quite a lot of our learners are not performing well in this topic in the final exam. We are going to look at fluvial landforms. I hope everything is still going well. You are preparing yourselves and getting ready to write your final examinations. The most important thing that I have to share with you, grade 12s again, is that remember, according to our new structure, geomorphology and climatology will now form part of what we are going to call paper 1. And then in your paper 2, you're going to have settlement geography and economic geography. So this part of the content that we're going to deal with today will form part of your paper 1. Let's get right to it. Now, what's important about this is that we need to start and define what are the fluvial landforms that we're talking about. Remember, you have landforms or features that are found along the river course that are a result of the fluvial processes. Remember, as a river erodes, as a river, yes, flows from the source to the mouth, there are things or processes that occur as the water flows. We call them fluvial processes. What are those fluvial processes? We say a river erodes, a river transports, and a river deposits. So these are what we call the fluvial processes. Like as you see on the slide there, it says flowing waters are continually eroding, they are continually transporting, and they are depositing sediments. So all these are fluvial processes. So please have this in mind. Whenever you meet a question that says, what fluvial process is there? Know that when we refer to fluvial processes, we mean erosion or transportation or deposition. Let's move on. Now, what is it that you need to know as a grade 12 learner about this topic, on this topic? What are the most important things that you need to know? It's important for a geographer to know how to identify these fluvial landforms. You need to describe them, and you also need to know their formation. How are these landforms formed? And what is their importance, the significance of these landforms and the impact of these fluvial landforms or features. Now, by now, you would have studied the part in geomorphology that was talking to river grading, the fluvial processes. You would have studied that. You know at this moment that in a river there is the upper course, there is the middle course, and the lower course. What's important for us in this slide is to remember that these landforms that we are going to talk about, where do I find them in the stages of a river? So it's important that you note that in the upper course, where the river flows with high speed or velocity, where you have V-shaped valleys, where there is vertical erosion that is dominant, you find landforms like waterfalls and rapids, very importantly. So you know that, okay, waterfalls and rapids are found in the upper course. In the middle course, where the speed now is just moderate, and then you have both vertical fluvial processes that are there, you have vertical and lateral erosion, you see, then there are a lot of streams, because now there's more water again, then you'd find meanders. That's what you expect to find in the middle course. But in the lower course, what is it that you expect to find? Well, now there is low velocity, and the fluvial process that's dominant there in the lower course is deposition. You expect to find meanders are still there, braided streams or braided channels, levies, oxbow lakes, and deltas. These are the landforms that we're going to discuss today in our lesson. That's very important to know, where do we find these landforms. And I have to say, very importantly, when you talk of a delta is what you find where at the mouth of the river. It's not necessarily in the lower course, but be specific. You find a delta at the mouth of the river where the river joins the sea. You'd find a landform that is a delta. Let's go on. Now let's start and discuss landforms that are found in the upper course. Like I said, grade 12s, you have landforms that are called rapids. Look at the picture. You would notice that you see there's boulders, large boulders of rocks, and now the water is flowing fast, but because of the resistance as it is flowing against the rocks, it forms some sort of a white foam. This usually is found in the upper course. Now, the formation of this thing, of the rapids, says to us, it stretches of fast-flowing water tumbling over a rocky, shallow riverbed. Don't forget, this is the upper course. The riverbed is not yet deep, it's shallow. So you'd have water just flowing and tumbling against the rocks that are there. They are formed when the water goes from one hard rock that resists the water erosion to a softer rock that is easier eroded. Now, what is important about these rapids as a landform? You know that no use but recreation. That's where you have people partaking in this sport that's called river rafting, and then again they are good as tourist attractions. So what's important that we have to note about these rapids, one is that how are they formed? They are formed in an area where the riverbed is shallow. The second thing that's important, it's their significance. They can be only used for recreation. The sport, river rafting, it's river rafting because canoeing, the canoes will just break as they hit against the rocks there. And then they are also important as tourist attraction features. Let's move on. Now, the other important landform that you find in the upper course will be the waterfalls. I think it's self-explanatory. It's water that is falling. It's a waterfall. As you explain it, you say it's an area where water flows over a vertical or over a steep drop in the course of a stream or river. Now, most importantly, it's water dropping from a high elevated area to a lower area in the course of the river. It forms when there are horizontal bands of resistant rock. You'll find that there are hard rock that is positioned over exposed, less resistant rock. What will happen? The soft rock is eroded quicker than the hard rock, and this creates excuse me, a quicker than the hard rock, and this creates a step. As erosion continues, the hard rock is undercut, forming an overhang. Abrasion and hydraulic action erode to create a plunge pool. I think all these features are things that we need to actually see and then to really understand what we are talking about. I think you see there, point number 5. It says, as this process continues, as this undercut and overhang and plunge pool, this process continues, and the waterfall retreats upstream. Very importantly, as erosion occurs, remember it's headward erosion, so our waterfall will also retreat upstream. A steep-sided valley is left where the waterfall once was, and we say that area where we once had the waterfall, before it could retreat backwards, you'd have a steep sided valley, and we'd say that valley is called a gorge. Now let us look at what we are talking about. Now, this is a picture of the Howick waterfall. You notice? Now there is our plunge pool. You see where it's like a pool. And then everything, the water just falls into the pool. There you'd see movement of water retreating backwards. I think this structure explains everything that we have been talking about as we refer to the waterfall. Remember, we said there's a hard rock that has been exposed and a soft rock beneath a hard rock. You notice there. So it means this soft rock will be eroded faster than the hard rock that is above. The reason is that you have the overhang, a hard rock that is on top of a soft rock, so water will be falling, and as it falls onto this area that we say the area is a plunge pool, and then there you'd have your waterfall. Where do you find these waterfalls? We find it in the upper course of the river. What is the importance of waterfalls? Now, these waterfalls, we use them again to generate electricity. The strong currents that you find near the falls are often used to generate electricity. Waterfalls are sometimes advantages. They form a barrier to infrastructure development. Think about it. If you have to maybe construct a road in an area where there's a waterfall, it's going to be difficult. For navigation of boats along a waterfall, again, it becomes difficult. So again, they serve as tourist attractions. And then fishing can be carried out on areas where there are waterfalls. They are very beautiful. It's a nice feature, hence you'd see tourists go in there to see the area. They provide opportunities for a wide range of sometimes incompatible outdoor leisure activities. What I did here, grade 12s, again, I said, now how do you identify a waterfall on your topographic map? Very importantly, you'd see there's the symbol there, and then there's your river, and look at that symbol, it says it's a waterfall. I think we should move on. Moving on, we're looking at landforms that are found in the middle course. If you look at the picture there, you will notice that you are looking at a river that is winding like a snake. Now, we are not going to say it's a snake-like river. We are saying this is a river meander, a meandering river. So this is what you expect to see when you talk of a meandering river. Now, what is it? If you have to explain it in a concept, you're going to say it's rivers that are flowing over gently sloping ground. Remember, it's in the middle course. And they begin to curve back and forth across the landscape like you see in the picture. In the middle course, the river has more energy and high volume of water as a result of the tributaries that are joining the mainstream. So sideways erosion starts to widen the river channel. As the river erodes laterally to the right side and to the left side, remember, lateral erosion means that rivers are now eroding on the sides or towards the banks, let me say that. Now, as they form large bends and then a horseshoe-like loops that are called meanders. The formation of the meanders is due to both, one, deposition, erosion processes, fluvial processes, deposition and erosion, and meanders gradually migrate downstream. Very importantly, remember, as we were talking about the waterfalls, we said they migrate upstream. But in this case, our meanders, they migrate downstream. So they'll be moving from the middle course towards the lower course. That is very important for you to note. Now, this is a structure that shows a river, a loop of a meandering river. This is very important for us to note. Remember, we said we have two fluvial processes that occur around a meander loop. Ne? This thing, the curve, we call a meander loop. Now, what happens? Look at the side of A, where you have a river cliff or an undercut slope. You notice that it's the side where the water is flowing faster. So the result of thereof is that you are going to have erosion on the river cliff side because water is flowing faster, and then you're going to have deposition at B where water is flowing slow. So you'd have, it's a bend, so you'd have buildup of deposits, silt, and everything being dropped there. If you look at the drawing or the picture on your right of the screen, now you'll notice, now that is what we call a cross-section of a meandering valley. Or you notice that you have your slip-off slope where deposition occurring on the inside bank. Why? Because there is a slow current there. And then on your river cliff or your undercut slope, where you have a fast current of water flowing, you're going to have erosion. So what is the result? It means there's going to be lateral erosion on the right side of your picture where water is flowing fast, and a slow current deposition on the left-hand side of your picture. It's very important for us to note that, colleague, grade 12s, because it's what we need to know as we prepare ourselves for the final. Now, also importantly, remember, after this loop, what happens? You are going to have a feature that we call an oxbow lake. As this deposition and erosion was occurring, the result was that the loop, the meander loop, has been cut off, and it was cut off whilst it was still filled with water. We say that is an oxbow lake. So over time, the meander loop becomes tighter until the ends become and they come close together. Look at the drawing there. You notice that, remember, these are sides where erosion occurs, and then these are this part is where you have deposition. So as the river breaks through, for example, during the flood, when the river has a high discharge and more energy and the ends join, the loop is cut off from the channel. So what is it that you need to know on this slide? Very importantly, you need to know what is an oxbow lake and how does an oxbow lake occur. You are going to say it's a cut-off loop of a meander that is filled with water. Over time, the water in the oxbow lake in fact, the oxbow lake will lose water, and then we're going to be left with what we call a meander scar. Very importantly, grade 12s. Now let's move on and see what we have, because we have now the importance of these landforms, the meanders and the oxbow lakes. What we have again, look at the picture there on your right. How do you see these landforms on your topographic map? You're always going to have to identify. The first thing that you're going to say, obviously you're going to say, you can't say this is the upper course of the river. You are either going to say this is the middle course or the lower course, depending on the other information that you find on the river. I mean, on your map. But you are going to notice there is my slip-off slope, where you have slow moving water, a slow current, and you have deposition. And then there is my undercut slope or river cliff, where you have water moving very fast and you have erosion occurring. And then there is my oxbow lake on my topographic map. And even here it's labeled, this was part of the old river this oxbow lake. Remember I said after some time the water that is here will be lost, and then you are going to be left with a scar, and that scar will call a meander scar. But the importance of these landforms, one, we find that some cities around the world use these meanders for trade purposes. The boats and barges can access the town to some extent for trade. Oxbow lakes can be rich wildlife habitats. They can also be utilized for agricultural purposes, especially for crop farming, because the land around this area is very fertile. And yes, they can also be areas for tourists, so they can be used for tourist attraction. Now let's move on to another topic: landforms that we find in the lower course of the river. Now, I want you to look at the picture that we have there on your right hand side. You are going to notice there's a river channel, but next to the river channel you see there's it's an area that has got trees and vegetation, I think it's grass, that is filled with water. Although this area is not part of the river channel, but it's an area that has a lot of water, we refer to that area as a floodplain. Now, as you explain it, you're going to say a floodplain is an area bordering a river or next to the river that is composed of sediments that are deposited during flooding. It means, in simple terms, whenever this particular river that you see on the picture overflows, it gets filled up with water. The water overspills, it spills onto this area that we say it's a floodplain. And as the water spills, obviously the soil and all the particles that are in the river will be deposited on this area that we call the floodplain. Now, these areas, they form due to mainly deposition, these plain flat areas. Because of the gentle gradient, there is more deposition occurring. The heavier load of the rocks and pebbles that is heavier, they are deposited closer to the river banks. Again, I want you to take this statement to heart. We are saying that along the floodplain, heavier material is deposited closer to the river banks, and then the lighter material, load, the soil, the dust particles on the soil is taken further away. Very important, because as we move on, we're going to talk about it again. This statement, it results to some of the landforms that we're talking of, that we need to discuss. Again, look at the topo map. I want you to notice that, you see, a floodplain will be that area that is a flat area next to the river in both sides of the river bank. Like you notice here, there's my floodplain on the topo map. So it will be that flat area that you find next to the river bank. But again, you do not find this in the upper course. You can't say, I have a floodplain in the upper course. You have a floodplain where? In the lower course, where the gradient is almost gentle and your river is flowing very slowly and a lot of deposition is occurring. Now, what's the importance of these floodplains? The most important thing, they provide fertile land for agriculture. I think grade 12, it's simple, because we said as deposition occurs, most of the material that is not hard, soft material, light material, is deposited further away from the river. So it's easier for people to come and irrigate there. Easy to construct infrastructure along this area. The flat area is heavily populated. Settlements develop along the flood. Sometimes settlements will develop in this area. But again, it's very important to note that even though settlements develop along the floodplain, it should not be because it's a risk, because at times when the river floods, these settlements will be destroyed because of the flooding. So it's important that as they do occur along the floodplains, that they are further away from an area that that is prone to flooding. They also serve as tourist attractions. They are a source of water for economic and domestic purposes. Now, these areas are also beneficial for wildlife by creating a variety of habitats for fish and other animals. Now, very importantly, these flood plains, they preserve the water quality by continuously refreshing the water quality of the river by refreshing the river due to flooding. They provide recreational opportunities. We can do a lot of things along this area. Not ideal for settlements as they may be destroyed during the times of flooding. I think we have also discussed that. Now, let's move on. Now, the next landform that is very important is the natural levies. Now, let me take you back for a while. I said, as a river floods, the heavy material is deposited close to the river banks, and the lighter material is moved further away from the river banks. Now, what happens if there is continuous flooding of this river? Obviously, the river banks will be raised because more deposits that are heavy material will be on just next to the sides on the river banks. Now, the result thereof is a landform that we call natural levies. They are embankments, they are raised river banks which are formed when a river floods. So those are what we call levies. They are raised river banks that are formed when a river floods. Levies are formed by repeated flooding of a river. I think we have really mentioned that. And then we're also saying that when the river floods, the biggest, most coarse material will be deposited next to the river bank. I think this is important for you to understand, that because the heavy material is deposited next to the river bank, then if the river continuously floods, there's going to be a build-up of material that is deposited there, and the result thereof will be the banks will be raised. Now, continuous flooding causes repeated deposition on the river banks. The river form levies. They are made of silt and other materials. Now, let's move on. Now, what is the importance of these levies? I want you to look at the picture. You would notice that, you see, the vegetation that is there, it's so green. It says, obviously there, you'd have access. If I would plant vegetation or whatever crops that I would want to plant there, I would have one, access to water, two, access to fertile land. But now, the picture also shows the levies that you'd see the river banks where my arrows are pointing there. You'd see they have been raised. And then you'd say these are the natural levies. They prevent rivers from flooding, because after a long time, if the river banks have been raised, water will not be able to overspill. So we won't have experienced a lot of flooding in this area. Levies are usually parallel to the way the river flows. So levies can help direct the flow of water in the river, or the flow of the river. Levies can also provide a measure of protection from invaders. The fertile soil, like I stated earlier, is suitable for farming. They also may be used to increase available land for habitation, that is for settlements. Let's move on. Now, very important, another landform that we are looking at now are the braided streams. I want you to look at the picture again. You'll notice that it's in a river channel, the lower course, but you look now, the river is no longer flowing as a single unit of water. There's like small banks, and we call them these things. You see, it has moved. It has what we call distributaries. What are these? Just these channels, little channels that have developed in the river valley. Now you'd say, what's a braided stream? You are going to say it's a stream consisting of multiple small shallow channels, as you see in the picture. Now, these channels you either call distributaries. They divide and recombine numerous times, forming a pattern resembling the strands of a braid. That's why we call them distributaries, because they do what? They divide and they recombine numerous times along the river channel. Now, these braided streams, they form where the sediment load is deposited and shifting islands or sandbars between the channels. You said these areas that you find between the channels, you see between the river channels on the picture, we call them the shifting islands, or you call them the sandbars. When the river carrying capacity is, now how does this form? Why is this the case in the lower course? It's because the river carrying capacity is exceeded. The river deposits its load into the channel. So there's too much soil and rocks and everything in the river. So deposition now starts occurring where? Right within the river channel, not at the mouth as it is supposed to happen. Now, these braided streams, look at the topo map. You notice there's my sand island, there's my sand island, and there's my river with the distributaries. And then you know this is the lower course of the river. Now, what's the importance of these braided streams? Very importantly, they are a source of water for crop farming. The silt deposits form a fertile soil. Obviously, it's fertile there. Area preserves bird life. The area hampers the construction of infrastructure. The soil really is not stable enough for us to be constructing infrastructure there. It is therefore expensive to build roads and railway lines around the braided streams. Let us move on. Now, the other landform that we are going to talk about is the deltas. The deltas not now? These, as I said, remember, deltas occur at the mouth of a river. Now, look at the picture there. You notice that that particular river is flowing into the ocean, and as it flows, it now has a lot of channels. It has divided into many channels that are flowing into the river. So those different channels, distributaries again, we call them deltas. Now, it is a landform that you find at the mouth of a river where different channels of the same river flow into an ocean or sea. Now, the river slows down as it flows into the ocean due to silt deposits and the gentle gradient. The channel splits into several smaller channels and loses its velocity. As the river loses velocity, now the load is deposited on the river bed. Both the bed load and suspended load are deposited, producing fertile alluvial land. Now you have fertile land along these deltas. Now, why are they important? What's the importance of the deltas? The sand and the gravel that you find there are used for a variety of purposes. You use the sand for roads, you use them for building construction. They are important industrial hubs. The large settlements often grow up in the delta region. Very important for trade. Again, these areas you'd find a a lot of settlements that you'd find along the delta areas. Now, they are also a source of water. They sustain all ecosystems. Deltas ensure biodiversity. And now tourism, very importantly, you'd find there. I think you'd notice with all the landforms that we have discussed, we have always mentioned tourist attraction, recreation. So you don't forget that in almost all the landforms, because they are very beautiful features, and they provide a nice scenery. So people would go and want to see all these landforms that we have been discussing. They can be now with deltas, we say again, they can be part of water transport system. Like, it means when we have to transport goods using water, we also can use these deltas. They are a source of fish, and then deltas are usually highly fertile areas. Now they can support extensive crop cultivation. And then if you look at the map there, obviously you see a picture of a delta. Hence we say it's at the mouth. You see, it's an area where the mouth, the river joins the ocean, an area of which we refer to as the mouth of the river. Grade 12s, I think this is, thank you for listening. This was the end of our lesson for today. Good luck. Thank you.